Marcus Hayes checked his watch as he neared the airport security checkpoint, calculating every second in his mind. This flight was crucial. In less than 3 hours, he was scheduled to stand in front of a judge to defend a client in one of the biggest cases of his career. Missing this flight was not an option. With purpose in each step, he moved forward, weaving through the crowd, carrying the silent confidence of a man who knew his work and his worth. Removing his belt and shoes, he placed them in the plastic bin, following the practiced rhythm of a frequent traveler. Yet, just as he placed his laptop in the tray, a sharp voice sliced through the noise. "Sir, could you step over here, please?" Marcus's stomach tensed. He glanced up, locking eyes with the source of the command, a stocky man with a hard stare, a security agent who looked as if he'd been waiting just for him. Marcus felt the familiar surge of frustration. He was no stranger to the occasional random check, though he knew they were rarely random for him. "What's the issue?" he asked, keeping his tone calm, even as he felt his patience thinning. "Routine check," the agent replied curtly, his eyes cold and assessing, as if searching for an excuse that would justify the intervention. "Nothing to worry about." Marcus raised an eyebrow, catching the slight flicker of discomfort in the man's gaze. He knew that look. It was the same guarded suspicion he'd seen countless times in courtrooms. From witnesses hiding truths, from officials deflecting responsibility. But now, it was directed at him. "Routine." "Huh?" Marcus asked, his voice steady but edged. "I'm just trying to make my flight. Step aside, please." The agent's voice hardened, eyes narrowing in response. Marcus clenched his jaw, reminding himself to stay composed. He turned, his gaze landing on another agent, a younger woman standing off to the side. She looked back at him with a flash of sympathy, but quickly averted her eyes, visibly uncomfortable. "Look, I'm on my way to Chicago for business," Marcus said evenly, trying to catch her eye again. "Can we make this quick?" The first agent crossed his arms, his voice taking on an edge. "We have protocols, sir. It's standard procedure to check anything that seems suspicious." "Suspicious?" Marcus echoed, feeling his pulse pick up. He held back a bitter laugh, though he could feel the anger boiling beneath his composure. "Yes, suspicious." The agent's tone was cold, as if daring Marcus to protest. Marcus looked at the young agent again, who shifted uncomfortably, glancing between him and her superior. She looked as though she wanted to say something but was afraid to cross the line. "Fine," Marcus said, a tight smile forcing its way onto his face. "Ask your questions. But let's be clear. I'm trying to catch a flight, not get caught up in a power trip." The questioning started off mildly enough, with standard inquiries about his destination, his purpose for traveling, but it quickly turned invasive, with the agent pressing for specifics about his job, his personal background, even the type of work he did. Marcus's patience began to thin, his answers growing shorter with each question. He could feel the minutes slipping by, stealing precious time he couldn't afford to lose. He gripped his wristwatch, willing himself to stay calm, each second a reminder of the case that was waiting on him, the client who needed him, and the justice that needed to be served. "I've answered your questions," he finally said, locking eyes with the agent. "Am I free to go?" The agent exchanged a glance with his colleague, his jaw tightening. "Just a few more questions," he replied, crossing his arms as if to solidify his stance. "We'll get you on your way soon, sir." Marcus's jaw tightened further, frustration seeping through his calm exterior. This wasn't a security check anymore. This was something else entirely. "Look, agent," he paused, reading the man's badge. "Willis. I'm a civil rights attorney. I know my rights, and I know when I'm being profiled. So, unless you have a valid reason to hold me here, I need to be on my way." A flicker of irritation crossed Willis's face, but he quickly masked it with a smirk. "Cooperate, Mr. Hayes, and this will go a lot faster," Willis said, his words dripping with mock authority. Marcus sat in the cold, sterile room, his wrists sore from the tight cuffs that had only just been removed. The walls around him were blank, close, and suffocating, amplifying the indignity of his situation. It was strange how quickly everything had changed just minutes ago. He'd been another traveler in line, focused on his flight. Now he was a detainee, waiting in silence, anger simmering beneath his calm exterior. A soft hum of voices filtered in from the hallway, reminding him of the world continuing on the other side of this door, people rushing to their gates, grabbing coffees, hurrying to flights they wouldn't miss. The injustice hit him with a fresh surge of frustration. He knew racial profiling existed. He'd fought against it in court. But somehow, he'd told himself that his education, his achievements, his hard work would afford him some level of respect. Today, that belief felt hollow. Finally, the door opened. Agent Willis strode in, wearing that same smug expression. He crossed his arms and leaned casually against the wall, as though this were just another routine interaction for him. "Am I free to go?" Marcus asked, keeping his tone firm but measured, masking the anger roiling beneath the surface. Willis took his time, letting a slow smirk settle onto his face. "We're still reviewing your case," he said, with an air of mock courtesy. Marcus leaned forward, staring him down. "Case? This isn't a case, Agent Willis. It's profiling, plain and simple." Willis raised his eyebrows, feigning innocence. "We follow protocols, Mr. Hayes. We can't ignore suspicious behavior. That's our job." "Suspicious behavior?" Marcus's voice rose, a sharp edge breaking through his usual calm. "I was walking through security. I'm a man in a suit trying to catch a flight. What's suspicious about that?" Willis's gaze hardened, his tone icy. "Mr. Hayes, cooperation would be in your best interest." Marcus took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "I've been cooperating, Agent Willis, for nearly an hour now. I've answered every question. What more do you want?" Willis's mouth twisted into a thin smile. "I want you to understand that security protocol takes precedence, and your attitude isn't helping." Marcus felt a surge of frustration. "Attitude? You've questioned everything from my travel plans to my job without any grounds. You're holding me here for nothing." Willis shrugged, his smirk widening. "Maybe if you showed a little respect, we wouldn't be here right now." Respect. The word echoed in Marcus's mind, bitter and hollow. He'd heard it so many times. That unspoken expectation that he should swallow his pride, stay silent, endure whatever indignities were thrown his way, all for the sake of respect. But he was done with that. "You want respect?" Marcus said, his voice calm but steely. "Then start showing it. I'm a lawyer with every right to be here. You're detaining me based on nothing but your assumptions. And you know it." Willis's eyes narrowed, the thin veneer of professionalism slipping. "If you keep this up, Mr. Hayes, we can make this a lot harder for you." "Make it harder?" Marcus echoed, incredulous. "You're already making it hard. I've done nothing but comply. And here I am, detained, humiliated, and missing my flight. And for what? Because I don't fit the image you think belongs in an airport." For a moment, Willis's mask slipped, a flash of anger crossing his face. He took a step closer, his voice low and laced with threat. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? But people like you. You're always so quick to throw the race card around." The words hit Marcus like a slap, stinging and raw. "People like me," he repeated, his voice dangerously quiet. "People like me know our rights. People like me refuse to back down when we're treated unfairly. And people like you—" "Watch it," Willis interrupted, his tone laced with barely concealed menace. "No, you watch it," Marcus shot back, his calm breaking at last. "This isn't over. Willis, when I walk out of here, this incident will follow you. I'll make sure everyone knows exactly what happened here. I'm not just going to walk away quietly." For a split second, something flickered in Willis's expression, a hint of doubt, or perhaps fear. But he quickly masked it, folding his arms over his chest, His mouth twisted into a sneer. Good luck with that, Mr. Hayes. No one cares. You're just another face in the system. Marcus held his gaze. Unyielding. Maybe. But I'm a face with a voice, and I'm not afraid to use it. Willis chuckled. Dismissive. But his laughter sounded hollow in the sterile silence of the room. He turned on his heel, motioning to the door. Get out of here. And don't let the door hit you on the way out. Marcus stood, feeling the cold, pulsing ache in his wrists. But he didn't rush. He held Willis's gaze a moment longer, letting the silence settle, letting his presence linger, a silent reminder that he wasn't someone to be dismissed. As he walked out of that room, he felt the anger and frustration swirl into something sharper, more defined, a purpose. This wasn't going to be another incident that got swept under the rug. He pulled out his phone, opened the voice memo app, and began speaking. His voice steady and clear as he recounted every detail. When he stepped outside, the sun had already dipped low in the sky, casting the airport in shadow. The case he'd missed, the hours wasted, the degradation he'd endured, they all pulsed through him, fueling a new resolve. His fight had only just begun. And this time, it wasn't just for himself. It was for every person who'd ever been treated as suspicious for simply existing. Marcus pushed open the doors to his law firm, his mind racing with anger and resolve. As he strode through the hallways, his colleagues gave him questioning glances. Sensing the intensity in his gaze, he barely noticed, moving with a single purpose toward Ava's office. Ava Martinez, his colleague and closest ally, was already reviewing case files at her desk when he entered. She looked up as he stepped in, her expression shifting from surprise to immediate concern when she saw the storm in his eyes. Marcus, I saw your missed call last night. What happened? She asked, rising from her seat. They detained me at the airport. Ava. Hours of questioning, invasive searches, and they missed no opportunity to remind me that I was nothing but a suspect in their eyes, he replied, his voice hard, every word charged with the frustration of the night before. Ava's face tightened, her hands clenching slightly at her sides. She knew the challenges Marcus had faced, and as a lawyer fighting for civil rights, she understood the subtle and often not so subtle ways that prejudice could seep into daily life. But hearing it had happened to her friend, her colleague, struck a different nerve. They detained you, she echoed, her voice low with disbelief. Did they even give a reason? Only that I looked suspicious, Marcus said, bitterness seeping into his tone. I was just trying to make my flight. They humiliated me, held me there like I was a criminal. Ava's eyes blazed with anger as she listened, her resolve hardening. Marcus, this is more than just profiling. This is a violation of your rights. They need to be held accountable. He nodded, feeling a renewed surge of determination. I want to file a lawsuit. Ava, they need to answer for what they did. Not just to me, but to everyone they've treated this way. I want this to be a statement. Something they can't ignore or dismiss as just another incident. Without hesitation, Ava walked around her desk and pulled out a legal pad, her mind already racing with strategies. Let's start documenting everything. Every detail. Every word. Every second they kept you there. This isn't going to be a quick complaint, it's going to be a full case. One they won't be able to sweep under the rug. Marcus took a seat, feeling the tension in his body begin to ease, if only slightly. He knew this wouldn't be an easy battle. Taking on a major institution like airport security was a daunting task, and they would undoubtedly do everything in their power to defend themselves. But he also knew that with Ava by his side, he had a real chance. There was one agent, he said, recalling the moment of hesitation in the security line. Agent Tran. She looked uncomfortable with the way Willis was handling things. I think she might be willing to speak up. Ava's eyes lit up, a spark of hope glinting in them. Then we need to reach out to her. Her testimony could be critical, especially if she can confirm that this was more than just routine procedure. She flipped open a file, making a note to contact Tran. And if we can get surveillance footage from the terminal, We'll have a visual record of everything they put you through. Marcus nodded, feeling a fierce determination settle within him. This isn't just about getting justice for me. I want this to be a message, to show that we won't accept being profiled and mistreated because of how we look. Ava's expression softened, admiration and respect evident in her gaze. Then let's make sure we build the strongest case we can. Marcus, this lawsuit could set a precedent. Something that pushes for real change. But we're going to need evidence, witnesses, everything we can get to fight back against their narrative. The next hours were a whirlwind of preparation. Marcus and Ava pored over every angle, strategizing and organizing the case. They documented the details of his detainment, preparing to file charges for racial profiling, unlawful detention, emotional distress, and abuse of power. They discussed potential obstacles, including how airport security would likely claim Marcus was uncooperative to justify their treatment of him. Ava's gaze hardened as she considered the challenges ahead. They'll try to twist this, she said, her voice steely. They'll say you were aggressive or uncooperative. Anything to shift the blame onto you. But we'll be ready for them. The truth is on our side. As they worked, a powerful feeling of purpose began to build within Marcus, his earlier anger transforming into a calm but fierce determination. This wasn't just about what had happened to him, it was about challenging a system that had allowed incidents like this to happen over and over again. When Ava finally placed a thick folder of notes and evidence on her desk, she looked up at Marcus, a quiet intensity in her expression. We'll submit the complaint, reach out to Agent Tran, and start gathering everything we need. This case is going to make a difference. Marcus, we're not backing down. Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words settle over him. This fight is just beginning, and we're going to see it through, no matter what. They stood, a shared resolve between them as they prepared to file the lawsuit. As they walked out of the office, Marcus felt a sense of purpose stronger than ever before. This wasn't just about his dignity or his reputation, it was about justice. About making sure that others wouldn't have to face the same treatment he had. And as he stepped into the daylight, he knew that, with Ava's support, he was ready to fight for that justice with everything he had. The courthouse steps were crowded with reporters, their cameras and microphones poised to capture every word, every angle. Marcus and Ava exited the building to a flurry of flashbulbs and shouted questions, the heat of the midday sun blending with the intense scrutiny from the press. Marcus felt the weight of their gazes, every lens a reminder of how many eyes were on him and how much this case had come to symbolize. As they reached the podium, Ava gave him a brief nod, her eyes encouraging. Marcus took a steadying breath, raised his head, and addressed the crowd, letting the frustration and conviction from the courtroom drive his words. Thank you all for being here, he began, his voice carrying over the noise of the crowd. I filed this lawsuit not only because of what I went through, but because I believe no one should be treated as a suspect simply for existing. What happened to me is not an isolated incident. It's part of a much larger issue, a pattern of racial profiling that affects countless people every day. A murmur rippled through the crowd, and Marcus took the opportunity to let his message sink in before continuing. Today, we have a chance to do more than expose a single incident. We have a chance to demand change, to ensure that our institutions don't get away with profiling and mistreating people based on race or appearance. I hope this case can help shine a light on practices that harm and divide us. Reporters raised their hands, shouting over each other in their rush to be heard. Marcus pointed to a reporter in the front row, and she spoke up, her voice clear and insistent. Mr. Hayes, do you believe this lawsuit could lead to wider reform within airport security? Marcus met her gaze, his answer steady. That's exactly what I'm fighting for. This isn't just about one bad experience, it's about changing policies and holding people accountable. My goal is to ensure that no one else has to go through what I went through. I hope this case sets a precedent, one that pushes for real, systemic change. Another reporter jumped in, a bit more skeptical. Some say that you're making too much of this. that you were simply uncooperative during a routine check. How do you respond to that? Marcus's expression hardened slightly. I was cooperative from the moment I was asked to step aside. I answered every question and complied with every request. But there comes a point when compliance turns into submission, and when you're being held against your will without any reasonable cause. That's not security, it's profiling. The crowd buzzed as more questions flew. Ava stepped forward, her voice sharp and clear, adding weight to Marcus's words. Agent Tran, who was present during the detainment, has come forward to testify. Her statement supports Mr. Hayes' experience, showing that this was not a routine check but an abuse of authority rooted in bias. We're not here to destroy reputations. We're here to demand accountability and transparency within airport security. Cameras flashed as more reporters pushed forward, trying to get a better angle. A reporter near the back raised her voice, forcing her question through the noise. Do you believe Agent Willis should lose his job over this incident? Marcus paused, weighing his words carefully. What I believe is that there should be consequences for actions rooted in prejudice. If there's a pattern of behavior that suggests someone is using their position to discriminate against others, then, yes, they should face accountability. I didn't want this lawsuit to ruin anyone's life, but I do want it to challenge the way authority is used and abused. A final question rang out. What are your hopes for the future after this case? Marcus glanced at Ava before answering, his voice filled with a quiet but fierce determination. I hope for a future where we no longer have to talk about these things, where people don't have to look over their shoulder or wonder if they'll be seen as a threat just for showing up. I hope that we learn to see each other as equals, as human beings first, deserving of respect and dignity. This isn't just my fight, it's everyone's. As Marcus finished, a wave of applause broke out from the crowd, joined by the sounds of murmured support and gratitude. The press conference ended, but the energy lingered, a charge in the air that Marcus could feel reverberate through him. This was bigger than he'd imagined, this fight, this moment. It was about more than his case alone. It was about people everywhere who had faced the same silent accusations, the same unspoken prejudice. Marcus and Ava stepped down from the podium, making their way through the crowd. Each question, each flash of a camera, a testament to the importance of their fight. For the first time, Marcus felt a surge of hope that this case could be the turning point, that perhaps he was not alone in wanting a world free from the shadow of bias. As they walked back to their office, Ava turned to him, a small smile on her face. You did good out there, Marcus. This case is gaining traction. It's on every major outlet. People are paying attention. Marcus looked at her, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. We're not done yet, but if this helps even one person feel seen, if it brings us one step closer to real change, then it's worth it. Ava nodded, her eyes reflecting his resolve. Then let's make sure we see this through. They continued toward the office, the echoes of their words and the determination of their fight trailing behind them, rippling out into the world, sparking a call for justice that, this time, would not go unheard. The days that followed were a blur of planning, strategizing, and relentless preparation. Marcus and Ava poured every ounce of their energy into building the strongest case possible, determined to leave no angle overlooked, no stone unturned. Their office was filled with stacks of evidence, witness statements, and legal precedents, each document a piece of the armor they were crafting for the battle ahead. Late one evening, Marcus leaned back in his chair, exhaustion settling into his bones. He had spent the entire day revisiting the details of his detainment, each memory as raw and vivid as when it had happened. The humiliation, the anger, the frustration, they all surged back with every line of his notes. But he forced himself to push through, knowing that each detail mattered, that every small recollection could make a difference. Ava walked into his office, a thick file in her hands and a tired but determined look in her eyes. I just heard back from Agent Tran, she said, placing the file on his desk. She's willing to testify. She wants to come forward. Relief washed over Marcus. And he felt a surge of gratitude for Tran's courage. He knew how difficult it must have been for her to make that decision, to risk her job and her reputation to support his case. That's huge.
Ava.
Her testimony could be the key. Marcus replied, leaning forward. If she's willing to tell the truth about what happened, it could completely undermine their claim that this was just routine procedure. Ava nodded, her eyes sharp with focus. She's taking a big risk. Marcus. Airport security will likely do everything they can to discredit her. But if she stands by her statement, it could be exactly what we need to expose the bias and overreach in their actions. They spent the next few hours preparing for Tran's deposition, carefully framing questions that would allow her to provide a clear account of what she witnessed. Ava's sharp legal mind was invaluable as they anticipated the defense's counterarguments, crafting a strategy to protect Tran's credibility and prevent the defense from twisting her words. As they worked, Marcus felt a renewed sense of determination. He wasn't just preparing a case, he was preparing to dismantle a system that had allowed prejudice and discrimination to hide behind protocol for too long. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the office early, already scrolling through messages on his phone. His inbox was filled with emails, some supportive, others hostile. Strangers who had heard about his case had started reaching out, sharing their own experiences, thanking him for taking a stand. But there were also critics. People accusing him of playing the race card, questioning his motives, and dismissing his experience as just another complaint. A particular message caught his eye. The subject line read, "You're ruining airport security's reputation." The email was brief, but biting, accusing Marcus of seeking attention and trying to destroy hardworking agents. He felt a flash of anger, but reminded himself of why he was doing this. Ava walked in, noticing the tension on his face. More backlash. Marcus nodded, closing his phone. There will always be people who don't want to see the truth, who think this is all about making trouble. But if we back down now, we'll just be giving power to those who thrive on prejudice. She placed a hand on his shoulder, her expression a mix of sympathy and admiration. And that's why we keep going, Marcus. Because you're not just fighting for yourself, you're fighting for everyone who has ever felt silenced, mistreated, or ignored. Later that day, they met with Tran, her face pale but resolute as she entered their conference room. She glanced around nervously, her gaze settling on Marcus with a faint look of apology. "Thank you for coming," Marcus said, his tone warm. "I know this isn't easy, and I want you to know how much it means to me." Tran took a shaky breath, nodding. I couldn't stay silent. Mr. Hayes, what Agent Willis did, it wasn't right. I was afraid to speak up at first, but I couldn't let it go. If I stay quiet, it'll just keep happening to other people. Ava gave Tran an encouraging smile. "We're here to support you. Your testimony will make a difference, and we'll protect you as much as we can. Just tell the truth about what you saw and heard." Tran nodded, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. "Agent Willis, he was looking for reasons to hold you. Mr. Hayes, from the moment you stepped aside, I could tell." He kept pressing, even when it was clear you were cooperating.
I wanted to say something.
But she trailed off, guilt flickering across her face. "It's all right, Tran," Marcus assured her. "I know how hard it is to stand up against something like this. What matters is that you're here now, and that you're willing to help us make things right." The deposition continued, and as Tran spoke, Marcus felt a deep sense of validation. Her words echoed everything he had felt during his detainment: the targeted questioning, the suspicion, the underlying hostility disguised as routine procedure. Hearing it from someone else's perspective solidified his resolve to see this fight through to the end. As they wrapped up, Ava walked Tran to the door, offering her a few words of encouragement. Marcus remained seated, staring down at the notes they had taken, a sense of clarity settling over him. This case wasn't just a stand against one agent's prejudice, it was a stand against an entire system that allowed such behavior to flourish unchecked. Ava returned, her expression a mixture of satisfaction and determination. "We have what we need, Marcus. Trans testimony, the evidence, everything. Airport security will try to discredit you, paint you as uncooperative or a threat, but we're ready for them." Marcus nodded, feeling the weight of her words. "Let them try. We have the truth on our side. And now we have the proof to back it up." They spent the rest of the evening refining their case, poring over every detail, every potential argument the defense might raise. For Marcus, this wasn't just a fight for himself, it was a fight for change. A battle against a system that had treated too many people unfairly. And with each hour they spent preparing, he felt more certain that he was ready for whatever lay ahead. As the night wore on, Ava looked up from her notes, meeting Marcus's gaze with a quiet intensity. This case could set a precedent, Marcus. It could show people that they don't have to accept mistreatment or remain silent. But they'll come at you hard for this. Are you ready? Marcus met her gaze, his voice steady and unflinching. "I'm ready."
Ava, this isn't just about me.
It's about standing up for everyone who has ever felt voiceless. About proving that justice isn't just a word on a page. It's something we can make real, one case at a time. Ava gave him a firm nod, her eyes reflecting his resolve. "Then let's see this through. We have a fight ahead of us, but we're ready for it." As they finally packed up for the night, Marcus felt a sense of purpose stronger than any exhaustion. This case was about more than his own experience. It was about holding power to account, about challenging a broken system, and about showing the world that people would no longer stay silent in the face of injustice. And as he locked the door behind him, he knew that no matter what lay ahead, he was prepared to see this fight through to the end. The day of the trial dawned clear and bright, but the weight in Marcus's chest made it feel overcast. He adjusted his suit in the courthouse restroom, breathing deeply, steadying himself. Today wasn't just any day. It was the beginning of a legal battle that could shift the scales. Not only for him, but for everyone who had ever been wrongfully profiled,
Detained.
or humiliated under the guise of security. As he entered the packed courtroom, Marcus scanned the faces of the jury, each expression guarded, observing him with quiet curiosity. Across the room sat the defense team representing airport security, dressed in immaculate suits with carefully practiced expressions of neutrality. Agent Willis sat among them, his face smug and unrepentant, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. Ava squeezed Marcus's arm, grounding him. "We've prepared for this," she whispered, her voice laced with confidence. "Trust the truth. Trust yourself." The judge entered, and the trial began. The defense attorney rose first, gliding to the center of the courtroom with a confidence born of countless courtroom battles. He launched into his opening statement, painting Marcus's detainment as nothing more than routine protocol, a necessary measure taken in the interest of public safety. He suggested that Marcus's demeanor was unusually tense and that his responses raised red flags. Agent Willis was simply doing his job, the attorney insisted, casting a glance at the jury. He was following protocol to ensure the safety of all passengers. Mr. Hayes's behavior warranted further questioning, plain and simple. Marcus felt a flicker of anger, but kept his expression neutral. He'd expected this line of defense, the predictable twisting of facts. As the attorney spoke, he noticed some jury members nodding slightly, their faces neutral yet attentive. This was their job, to listen to both sides. But he knew the real story would be told when it was his turn. Finally, Marcus's moment arrived. He stood, feeling the eyes of the jury and the entire courtroom trained on him as he approached the witness stand. The silence was thick, almost electric. He took a deep breath, letting his anger simmer just below the surface as he began his testimony. "This isn't a case about security," Marcus began,
His voice steady.
every word resonant. "This is about being singled out,
Detained.
and humiliated based solely on appearance. I wasn't detained because of what I did, I was detained because of who I am and how I look." He recounted, with painful clarity, each moment of that day, from the invasive questioning to the suspicion-filled glares. He described the fear and anger he had felt. He shared how he had complied with every request, answered every question, and yet was treated as though he was a threat simply for existing. The jury listened, some members leaning in as he spoke, his words seemingly resonating with them. As Marcus recounted Agent Willis's taunts and the prolonged detention without cause, he felt a shift in the room. For the first time since the incident, he felt like he was truly being heard. When Ava took her turn, she brought up Agent Tran as a witness. Tran approached the stand, her face pale but resolute. She met Marcus's gaze briefly, a flicker of apology in her eyes, and he gave her an encouraging nod. This wasn't easy for her, he knew that, but her testimony could be the turning point. Ava began gently, guiding Tran through her accounting of the incident. Tran's voice trembled at first, but grew stronger as she described the events that had unfolded. She admitted that she had felt uncomfortable with the way Agent Willis was handling the situation, that she'd sensed an aggression and prejudice in his tone. "Agent Tran," Ava asked, her tone both respectful and firm, "did you believe that Mr. Hayes was behaving suspiciously?" Tran hesitated, then shook her head.
No.
Mr. Hayes was calm, cooperative. It was Agent Willis who kept escalating things.
I wanted to say something,
but she paused,
swallowing,
then continued with newfound determination. "I was afraid. I knew if I spoke up, it might cost me my job." Her words sent a ripple through the courtroom, and Marcus noticed the jury's expressions shift. Their sympathy peaked. Tran's courage, her willingness to stand against her colleagues' actions, added a depth of credibility to Marcus's story. The defense attorney, clearly unnerved, leapt to his feet, attempting to discredit Tran's testimony. He painted her as an inexperienced agent, implying that she had misunderstood standard protocol. But Tran held firm, her quiet strength unyielding under the pressure, stating clearly that Willis's behavior had crossed a line. Next, Willis himself took the stand, his smirk replaced with an air of defensive arrogance. He recounted the incident in a detached, clinical manner, describing Marcus's responses as uncooperative and disrespectful. "Mr. Hayes was questioning my authority," Willis claimed, casting a sideways glance at Marcus. "He kept insisting he had rights, that he shouldn't have to comply. In my experience, that's a red flag." Ava seized the moment. "So, Agent Willis, you believe that a person insisting on their rights is cause for suspicion?" Willis hesitated, a slight crack in his composure. "It's unusual. Most people comply without questioning."
"So,"
Mr. Hayes standing up for himself, asking why he was being detained without cause that made him suspicious in your eyes. Ava pressed, her tone sharp. Willis shifted uncomfortably. "I was following protocol." Ava narrowed her gaze, her voice unwavering. "Protocol
or prejudice?"
Agent Willis. The question hung in the air, cutting through the courtroom like a blade. Willis's face flushed, his previous smugness crumbling as he struggled to answer. I was just doing my job." Marcus watched as the courtroom absorbed Ava's question, the implication lingering in the minds of every juror. The defense attorney quickly tried to regain control, redirecting attention to the need for security. But it was clear that their case was weakening. Surveillance footage showed Marcus cooperating calmly, dismantling their portrayal of him as aggressive. Tran's testimony painted Willis's actions as excessive and biased.
And now,
Willis's own defensive responses betrayed his underlying prejudice. When it came time for Marcus's closing statement, he stood with a calm, quiet resolve. The courtroom stilled as he began, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "This isn't just about my experience," he said, his gaze sweeping over the jury. "It's about every person who has ever felt marginalized, profiled, and judged based on appearances alone. It's about holding our institutions accountable, about refusing to let prejudice hide behind the mask of security." He paused, letting his words sink in. Today, I'm asking you to see beyond the protocols, beyond the excuses, and to recognize what truly happened here. This was not about protecting passengers. It was about targeting someone because of how they looked. It was about abuse of power and a disregard for human dignity. As he finished, a heavy silence settled over the room, a tension that seemed to pulse with the weight of the truth he had laid bare. The jury retired for deliberation, leaving Marcus to wait, his heart pounding with both hope and anxiety. Hours passed, each minute stretching painfully, until finally, the jury returned, their expressions solemn as they filed back into the courtroom. The foreperson rose, her voice steady as she announced the verdict.
We,
The jury, find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Hayes, and rule that the actions of airport security and Agent Willis constituted racial profiling, unlawful detention, emotional distress, and abuse of power. A wave of relief washed over Marcus, his heart lifting as he absorbed the verdict. The tension in his body eased as Ava grasped his hand, a triumphant smile lighting up her face. They had won. The judge addressed the airport security representatives sternly. This case has highlighted serious issues within your organization's protocols. I strongly urge immediate reforms to prevent future incidents of discrimination and profiling. Outside, a crowd of reporters and supporters awaited them. As Marcus stepped forward to speak, he felt the enormity of the moment settle over him. This was more than a personal victory, it was a victory for justice, for accountability, and for everyone who had ever been made to feel less than human. He addressed the crowd with quiet resolve. This verdict isn't just for me. It's a message to every institution, every authority, that we will no longer stand for prejudice or profiling.
today,
We took a stand for equality, for dignity, and for justice. And this is only the beginning. The crowd erupted in applause, and Marcus felt the weight of his journey lift, replaced by a deep, powerful sense of purpose. This wasn't just a win in court, it was a promise that the fight for justice would continue, and that he would be ready to meet it, one case, one battle, one stand at a time. The courtroom was silent as the jury filed back in, every face solemn, every movement heavy with meaning. Marcus sat at the plaintiff's table, his hands clasped tightly together. Ava leaned forward beside him, her expression a mixture of resolve and tension. They had both known this day would come, yet facing the jury now, the weight of it settled over them like a dense fog. Marcus's gaze drifted across the room, catching the eyes of the jurors. Some looked at him with sympathy, others with quiet contemplation, and others with an intensity that told him they had truly listened. He hoped they had understood his story, felt the depth of his experience. Across the aisle, Agent Willis sat stiffly,
his jaw set,
his gaze defiant. Despite everything, the evidence, the testimony, the truth, Willis's expression was untouched by remorse. The foreperson rose, holding a slip of paper, and handed it to the judge. The courtroom seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with anticipation, as the judge read the paper and then nodded, signaling for the verdict to be read aloud.
we,
The jury find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Hayes, and rule that the actions of airport security and Agent Willis constituted racial profiling, unlawful detention, emotional distress, and abuse of power. A wave of relief surged through Marcus, leaving him almost dizzy. He closed his eyes, a deep breath releasing all the tension that had coiled within him over these past weeks. When he opened them, Ava was smiling at him, her eyes bright with pride and triumph. "We did it," she whispered,
squeezing his hand.
as the verdict sank in. Murmurs filled the room, and Marcus glanced toward the jury box, silently thanking each member for their role in this victory. The judge addressed the airport security representatives with a stern warning, her voice firm and unyielding. "This case has highlighted serious concerns within your organization's protocols," she declared. I strongly urge your department to implement comprehensive reforms to prevent future incidents of discrimination and to ensure that all passengers are treated with fairness and respect. Across the aisle, Marcus caught a glimpse of Agent Willis's reaction. The once arrogant smirk had vanished, replaced by a tight, almost bewildered expression. It was as if he couldn't believe he'd been held accountable. For a moment, Marcus felt an unexpected pang of pity for him. Willis was as much a product of this flawed system as anyone else. But that pity was fleeting. He knew that Willis had made a choice that day in the airport. A choice to act on his prejudices.
And now,
Finally, he would face the consequences. As Marcus and Ava gathered their things to leave, they were met with handshakes and nods of support from people throughout the courtroom. Some had followed the case closely, and others had likely been touched by similar experiences. Each of them was a reminder that this case was bigger than him, that it represented a collective fight for dignity and respect. Outside the courthouse, a sea of reporters waited, cameras flashing as soon as Marcus and Ava emerged. The verdict had already made headlines. The crowd of journalists eager to capture this historic moment. Marcus raised a hand to quiet the reporters, the questions flying in rapid succession as microphones were thrust toward him. Mr. Hayes, can you tell us how you're feeling now that you've won? He took a moment, collecting his thoughts, letting the significance of his words settle over him. Today's verdict is a victory, not just for me, but for everyone who has ever been treated unfairly, who has ever been judged or profiled based on nothing but their appearance. Marcus said, his voice steady, carrying the weight of his journey. This isn't just about one incident. It's about accountability, about making sure that no institution, no person with authority, is allowed to abuse their power without consequences. A hush fell over the crowd, his words hanging in the air as reporters jotted down notes, nodding along as he spoke. This case has shown us that we don't have to accept discrimination, that we don't have to stand by while others make assumptions based on biases. We have the right to be treated with respect, to be seen for who we are, not for what someone assumes we are. A young reporter near the front raised her voice. Do you believe this case will lead to significant changes in airport security policies? Marcus nodded, his gaze unwavering. That's my hope. My fight was never about personal gain. It was about sending a message that profiling and discrimination cannot and will not be tolerated. I believe this case will push institutions to examine their policies, to rethink their training, and to make sure that what happened to me doesn't happen to anyone else. Ava stepped forward, her voice joining Marcus's. We're calling for a change in culture within these institutions. We want to see real, measurable reforms that ensure passengers are treated equally and fairly, regardless of race or background. We've come a long way, but this is only the beginning. The press conference continued, with more questions and statements of support. Marcus felt a sense of fulfillment grow within him, a feeling that perhaps his efforts had not only changed his own life, but had opened the door for others to step forward, to demand better, to push for justice. As the crowd began to disperse, Ava turned to him, a satisfied smile lighting up her face. We did it, Marcus. You've made history. He returned her smile, though his mind was already turning toward the future. We did, but there's still so much work to do. This is just the start. She nodded, understanding. I know, but you've shown people what's possible. You've given a voice to so many who didn't have one. The thought settled deeply within him, filling him with gratitude and resolve. This journey had been one of the most challenging experiences of his life, but he knew he wouldn't have done it any other way. He had taken a stand, and that stand would resonate, a ripple of justice pushing outward, challenging others to fight for what was right. As they walked back to the office together, Marcus felt a calm sense of purpose settle over him. He knew that there would be other fights, other cases, other moments when he would be called upon to defend the rights of those who could not defend themselves. But today, in this moment, he had claimed a victory that would echo long beyond this case. And with that, he knew this was only the beginning. A few days after the verdict, Marcus sat at his desk, sifting through the emails and messages that had flooded in since the trial. His inbox was a mix of heartfelt gratitude, stories from strangers sharing their own encounters with prejudice, and the occasional bitter criticism. The support far outweighed the backlash. And with every story he read, Marcus felt the magnitude of what they had accomplished settle even deeper within him. He clicked on an email titled "Thank you for giving us a voice." It was from a woman in Atlanta who described an incident where her husband had been detained at a checkpoint, treated with suspicion simply because of how he looked. "Your courage in taking a stand gives us hope," she wrote. "Thank you for making the world listen." Marcus sat back, the words lingering in his mind, filling him with a mix of pride and humility. This case had become about so much more than his own experience. It was a story shared by countless others, a reminder that justice was not just a personal fight but a collective one. He had given a voice to people who had, for too long, been silenced. A knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. Ava entered, a triumphant smile lighting up her face as she held a newspaper aloft. She laid it down on his desk, the headline bold and unmistakable: "Airport Security Fires Agent Willis After Racial Profiling Verdict in Hayes Case." Marcus felt a surge of satisfaction, mixed with a sense of finality. He had fought for this.
And now,
It was real. "I wasn't sure they'd actually take action," he said, his voice quieter than he intended. "They didn't have a choice." Ava replied, her eyes shining with pride. "You show them that people won't stand for injustice anymore, and they're going to have to face that reality." He picked up the paper, scanning the article. The words confirmed that Willis had been dismissed, his actions deemed inconsistent with the values and protocols of airport security. The agency had released a statement promising reforms, acknowledging the need for better training and more accountability within their ranks. But Marcus knew this wasn't about Willis alone. Firing him was a first step, but it was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. His fight had always been about the system that allowed people like Willis to operate unchecked. He hoped that this case would be a catalyst, sparking broader changes that would protect others from suffering similar indignities. "Ava," he said, looking up at her, "we didn't just win a case. We changed something. Maybe not everything, but something important. And I couldn't have done it without you." She gave him a warm smile, a hint of emotion flickering in her eyes. "We did this together. You gave people hope, Marcus. You made them believe that their voices matter." He nodded, feeling the weight of her words. There's still so much more to do. So many other people who need someone to stand up for them. Ava's smile widened. "Then let's keep going. There's more work to be done, more battles to fight, and I'll be right there with you." They spent the rest of the afternoon discussing next steps, brainstorming ideas on how to use the momentum from the case to push for even greater reforms. They talked about launching a nonprofit focused on addressing racial profiling and discrimination, about partnering with other advocates and organizations to build a network of support for those facing injustice. As evening fell, Marcus stepped outside the office, taking a moment to breathe in the cool night air. The city lights stretched out before him, bright and unwavering. He thought of the people he'd met along the way, the stories he'd heard, and the hope he had seen in the eyes of those who had supported him. This victory wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who had ever been made to feel invisible, everyone who had been judged,
detained,
or humiliated for simply existing. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he glanced at the screen. It was a message from his father, a man who had taught him from an early age to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost.
"Proud of you, son.
This is just the beginning. Keep fighting." Marcus smiled, a surge of determination rising within him. He replied, "I will." He looked out over the city, feeling a sense of calm purpose settle over him. The journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges and opposition. But he knew now, more than ever, that he was ready. He had fought, he had won, and he would continue to stand for justice. for those who couldn't stand for themselves. With one last look at the skyline, Marcus turned and walked back into the building, ready to continue the fight. This was more than a victory, it was a movement, a promise, and a call to action. And he would answer that call. One case, one battle, one step at a time, until justice was not just a fleeting victory, but a lasting reality.